No.
I was from the 2008 class.
Okay.
So
Ali.
Yeah.
Is it Ali? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Isn't it Alistair, isn't it?
Yeah, but I can't walk around calling myself Allah when I'm minorities will get angry.
I love it. Okay, fair enough. Fair point now,
Yeah.
I guess. Is this okay? So now...
Yeah, no, I'm up in that distance.
Let's just move this in slightly. Great.
Okay, just going to go
Good.
quickly say something. So for everybody who's joined it and who joined online, we've got the beautiful Nat Martin. This is
Hi,
a
guys.
time, like, taking you through Pat Martino and his lines, licks.
Yep.
And
a
we
bit of a start.
we're gonna go start now. So I'm
Cool.
over to the magic
All right.
Pat
Fun
Martino
stuff.
impersonator.
Yeah.
All right, great.
So, guys, yeah, what I've done is I've essentially put together a little bit of information which you can see in front of you, and I guess for the online guys this will be made available, I guess. But it's essentially it talks about this idea of minorization, or which is kind of what Pat Martino's sort of big on. So let's just have a little read through here. So it says, the idea with this concept is that you consider the approach to each chord type as being related to a minor tonality and treat each chord in this way in order to generate playing approaches and ideas. So Pat Martino favours the Dorian mode and applies it to a great number of chords, but he is aware of the core notes of the chords he is playing this sound over. So what we mean by that is the arpeggio notes, or the chord tones. And so many of his licks and ideas are often hybrids of a range of scales and modes, and this is actually evident in some of the licks we're going to look at. Yeah, so this will become clear as we look at the licks, but this means really just from the perspective of really getting to grips with this stuff, you should have a strong knowledge of arpeggios and chord tones, really, to be to kind of help you get your head around what's going on almost, and to be able to generate your own ideas, and also so that you can clearly outline the changes that you're kind of composing lines through, really. So a key phrase that I thought I'd just throw in is convert to minor. If you've looked at any of his kind of books, or there's his REH video Creative Force, this phrase is mentioned. So you sort of convert to minor in order to find a way to approach playing over whatever the progression is. So some of the approaches Pat uses are shown below, and then the lick sheet seeks to contextualize these. So basically I've looked at his playing in two main contexts, which is a major 251 and a minor 251. Obviously there are other chord types we would play over, but the vast majority of jazz standards, at least, are comprised of major and minor 251s, and some of them many different major and minor 251s moving through a lot of keys, but those are kind of your two main progressions to really get to grips with, and essentially we've got a couple of tables here which show some of the ideas. So for example, in a major 251, the natural, the kind of normal scale we would use on chord 2 would be Dorian. So if we had a 251 in C, let's make it a little bit louder, we would have Dorian from the D, which is obvious. That goes nicely with the chord because the chord is D minor 7. So that will make sense. Chord 2, Dorian is the mode. What Pat Martino then does is he then sticks with that Dorian mode on chord 5. So any kind of G chord, you might have G, G7, G9, G13, and sus versions of these as well. So G9 sus, G13 sus, and just G11 as well. He would still play. He would still be playing kind of D Dorian over this G, any of these G chords. So basically, I guess another way to refer to that is that he plays the 2 chords over chord 2. He kind of still plays chord 2 when he's on chord 5. So when he goes to G7, he's still really thinking of chord 2. So that's kind of his main approach, and then so he's taken chord 5 and he's minorized it almost by saying, okay, let's play Dorian from the 2. I'm playing a minor scale that kind of still outlines that chord, but really as well, if you think, it's not actually any different. So if we're playing diatonically on a 2-5-1, Dorian from D is the same 7 notes as Mixolydian from G. So actually, he's not doing anything too different there, except I suppose if he's really playing D minor 7 and the chord is G7, he's sort of making it sound more like a sus chord, particularly if he's hitting that C a lot.
So is he still kicking out the note, highlighting the notes as if it was that D minor chord, even though there's a G underneath it? He's still, like I said, that D, C, and F and so on.
Yeah, to an extent. I think it. Again, some of the lines we'll take a look at in a sec will help with kind of demonstrating that. I think he is outlining G7, for example. So, for example, he might hit that B on a beat. So if you've got this, he might hit that B when we get to the G7. So it definitely highlights that chord. But I think, as I understand it, his idea of kind of this minorization and converting to minor, it's so that he it facilitates and it makes easier the playing, because then you don't have to think of a whole load of different things. You can just think of the same thing and convert it slightly to fit a new chord. So rather than learning a whole new scale and a whole load of new shapes, basically you've still got your D minor 7 kind of sound, which works on that chord as well. So all your licks that work on D minor 7 and the 2 chord will work on the G7 as well. So it just makes life a bit easier. But some of the licks will demonstrate this, and then on chord 1, a typical thing he might do is actually play Dorian, but from the 6th degree of the chord. So if we've got C major 7, what's our 6th degree? A, exactly. A. So from A, he might play Dorian from the A. How does that relate to C as a mode? So if A...
That'd be the Lydian mode.
Well done.
Yeah.
Nice one, Ali. Yeah, exactly. So that gives us Lydian sound on C major 7. But the thing is, this works really well, and there's a reason it works really well. One of the common substitutes on, say, if we go back to that 2 chord, a very common substitute is to go up to the minor 3rd of that chord and play a major 7 arpeggio. So that's a very common device for jazz soloing. So basically you're playing F major 7 in that case. So if you think now we're on the C major 7 but we're playing A Dorian, if we start from the 3rd of A Dorian, what note is that? That's a C natural, isn't it? So we've actually got a C major 7 arpeggio from the minor 3rd of Dorian. So if you think the chord is then C major 7, we've basically, if we treat it as A Dorian and we use some of the same ideas as we normally do, it's still gonna sound all right, because we're still highlighting some of the key notes. I guess I'm just trying to explain kind of partially how these relate to the chord, because if you know, normally if you think of chord 1, we say, well, we'll play Ionian, or Lydian. But if we say, well, we're playing Dorian from the 6th, that's potentially a bit confusing, but, as you've said, that gives us a Lydian sound, Ali, so it's just understanding that and being clear on that so that we know what we're doing, almost. So there are other options there, which we will come to discuss, but on chord 5 in particular, some of the other options that Pat Martino likes to use are Dorian, but from the flat 2. So say we've got G7, he would play Dorian from A flat. So that essentially that's almost the same as melodic minor from A flat. So if you think of G altered, that's A flat melodic minor, isn't it? It's the same note. So we go up a half step, we get A flat melodic minor. A flat melodic minor is only one note different from A flat Dorian. It's the G compared to the G flat. So actually, if we play A flat Dorian, we've got 6 out of 7 of the sounds of A flat melodic minor, which is actually G altered. We've got 6 of those 7 sounds available. We have to be a bit wary of that G flat, because if we think of it as an F sharp, it's like a major 7 on the dominant. So if we play that really heavily and the chord is, we're going to perhaps run into a bit of trouble. So we have to be careful of that. But the thing is as well, within A flat Dorian in this case, we've actually got an F natural anyway. So it kind of works anyway, but that's another of the options he likes to use. And then just thinking ahead now to kind of minor 2-5-1s before we start checking out some of the licks. Again, this minorizing thing, something he likes to do is, if you've got, say, E minor 7 flat 5, instead of playing, you know, obviously, what would be the standard scale that would go with that minor 7 flat 5 chord? It could be, but
from A, but
right.
Lockridge, I think?
Yeah, I mean that's one option, but you're right. We could use Locrian natural 6th as well, Ali, if we wanted to use harmonic minor there. But
you could do regular Locrian.
Yeah, exactly, regular Locrian. So that's kind of what I was thinking of at this point. So if we take regular Locrian as our, you know, our kind of usual go-to thing, what Pat Martino would tend to do is go up to the minor 3rd of that and play Dorian. Which, again, makes perfect sense in a way. Yeah, sure. Hey, Tom, you're right. So, if we've got a minor 7 flat 5 from E, that would be like chord 7 in the key of F, right?
Yeah.
E minor 7 flat 5. So, chord 2 in the key of F is G minor 7. So, what he's doing is instead of playing E Locrian, he's thinking of it as G Dorian, which is like chord 2. So it's the same, it's a diatonic substitution, really, that.
Sure.
So E minor 7 flat 5, play G Dorian. If you hear it in context, it kind of, it makes... kind of makes perfect sense, doesn't it, when you hear it over the top of the chord. So you can literally, again, you've got all your kind of G Dorian licks under your fingers, work really well. So again, you've thought of it as a minor thing, and you've then got all those familiar ideas you've got under your fingers. And then what's one of the other different ones that he might use on the 5 chord? Yeah, so this is sometimes what he does then is he will kind of use Locrian from E as well, but he'll stick with that Dorian from the... Oh. That was weird. There's an echo. He'll stick with that Dorian from the G, but over the A7. So it's kind of a weird sound. So if I played that, yeah, so just about. So it kind of works, but the thing is, the big note you're missing is that C sharp, which is the 3rd. But, you know, we said, just like we mentioned this a moment ago, Tom, as well, before you'd arrived, and we said if we had D minor 7 as a 2 chord, going to G7 as a 5, something Pat Martino would do would be to play Dorian on that 2 chord, and then on the G7 he would still play D Dorian.
Yeah.
But they're one and the same scale, right? So Dorian from D is Mixolydian from G, exactly. So basically we could say there over 2 and over 5 we're thinking chord 2, so we're kind of playing chord 2. That can work in reverse as well. So if you've got am I getting myself mixed up here? So you could play 5 on chord 2 and 5 on 5 as well. So it's very interchangeable, and some players you'll hear them do that. They might have this oh, so we've got the volume down. There it is. So basically, obviously that's chord 2, right? There's chord 5. There's chord 1. So instead of outlining chord 2, what you could do is just go straight to altered. So you've kind of got that option as well. It sounds weird against chord 2 to go straight in for altered, but it works because you're going to that chord anyway. So that sound will kind of start to sit right when that chord comes in. So that's just something else to think about I suppose in general. I mean, Pat Martino would definitely do this, but just as a general kind of aside for kind of playing over changes, when you've got 2 and you've got 5, you can think of both of them as being 2, or you can think of both of them as being 5. And if you want to play an altered scale on 5, you can play that on 2 as well, even though all you're doing is really you're creating tension against, A sounds. You start adding different tensions. So for example, the flat 5 of A is like an E flat. In an E minor 7 flat 5, we don't have that note. So if I play that note strongly, that's tension. That's all that is really. That's going to create tension. But if I know what I'm doing with that tension, it's about the direction of the line, really. So if I've got structure to the line I'm playing, as in I know the tension I'm using, I'm working it back to a point where it's resolved, then it's all good. And again, this is definitely something Pat Martino does, because he uses some, on an A altered chord, he'll play, he might play E Dorian, which is quite, if you sounds terrible with that kind of shower scene chord happening. Yeah, it's quite a weird sound on that, right? But if like he knows what he's doing, how he's going to shape that line, how he's going to resolve that line. So it's cool to do that basically.
What chord was that in relation to?
So we were playing A7 sharp 5 there, and I was thinking of that as 5, and then thinking, well, for my 2 chord I could play E Dorian, for example, as a particular sound. And I would encourage you to think like this as well when you've gone.
So, and this is, for example, obviously minor keys are relative to major keys, but I was thinking in terms of chord 2 or 2, 5, 1 and a minor key, wouldn't you be playing Locrian instead on the 2?
Yeah, normally you would, but
you just play Dorian anyway.
You can, but the thing is, what he would usually do is play Dorian from the minor 3rd of the Locrian mode.
Okay, I see it now. Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
But something I've seen him kind of do in his playing and demonstrate as well on his traditional videos is playing like a Dorian over a 7 sharp 5 chord, but Dorian from the perfect 5th of that chord or of that root note. So in other words,
so we're still diatonic.
Not necessarily at this point, no. But this is what I want you to think about, because, and again, Pat Martino demonstrates this in his playing. If you've got a 2-5-1, and many other players demonstrate this, loads of jazz players, I've seen John Schofield do it, there's loads of other guys who do this. basically you can, if you've got a 2-5-1, it's kind of, if you've got 2, you've got 5, it's going to 1. It's kind of fair game almost what you choose to use, and you can kind of mix things up. So all you're doing is you're just creating a bit more tension if you imply a certain scale over the top of a chord. It kind of needs to relate to it somehow, as in, yeah, it needs to have some bearing in terms of it outlining the overall harmony. So if I've got -7 flat 5 and I play Dorian, I've got a perfect fifth in Dorian, right? But in Dorian I've got a minor third and a -7, so I'm kind of the functional harmony is happening whether I play perfect fifth or flat fifth. So this is what I'd encourage you to think about on the basis of somebody like Pat Martino's playing, which is like, don't be afraid to explore different sounds against things that you won't necessarily think that they would work against normally, because he kind of makes it work, and it's about the structure of the line that he's playing. And we see this with loads of other players as well. Later on in this sort of series, I'm doing some stuff on Wayne Krantz and Scott Henderson, and there's that melodic phrasing video of Scott Henderson's where he basically plays like D flat major over C major, and it sounds amazing, and it's because his phrasing and direction of line, his understanding is so good. So guys like Pat Martino are the same, you know, they're just, it's kind of there, so they could almost play anything and it would sound really good, which is, you know, we need some structure, obviously, yeah. But, all right, so, Tom, I need to do some of these. Do you want to just pass some of those back to Pete as well? There we go.
Oh, sweet old tie-ups.
Yeah, so it's got, they're notated and there's tab as well.
I mean, I don't know, because one of the things that is memorizing.
Yeah.
Is the idea that, so it's not quite understand, because I've looked into this before, but so from a dominant 7 chord to chord 5, if I play Dorian from the flat 7,
right,
it works,
and
I'm not sure why.
Right.
So that's the bit that I'm a bit unsure about, because there's a bunch of points in the dominant chord, a bunch of chord tones in which you can play Dorian, which would sound completely non-diatonic, but it works. I have no idea why. Are we going into that?
We're sort of covering that, yeah. I mean, certainly one of the ideas, but that particular idea is one of the ones listed on the handout on that table, and I mean, I think part of the reason it works is because it definitely highlights some
of the chord tones within the chord.
Some of the chord tones and some of the consonant sounds,
yes.
But yeah, for instance, that particular idea, if you've got an A7 and you play, which would be G Dorian, I guess, from the flat 7, right?
Yeah.
You've basically got, well, what have you got? You've got flat 7 root, flat 9, sharp 9, 4, 5, sharp 5, or flat 6, haven't you? So you've sort of got a mixture of, yeah, consonant tones. You've also got some more.
Yeah, mix of flat 6 with a flat 9 on top as well. Okay, sure.
Kind of, but the thing is, the crucial note you're missing is that third of the 5 chord. So it's like a 7 flat 9 sus. That's kind of the sound you're getting, basically, but with a sharp 5 as well. So 7 sharp 5 flat 9 sus. That's kind of what you're implying. So that's kind of why it works, because you can, essentially, you can kind of make anything work if you relate it to the chord and understand what you're playing.
So basically, we can play anything we want. And as long as
yeah, I mean, I think that's a statement to be treated with caution, I think, in that sense. But I think ideas such as the ones we're about to view do start to bend the rules, but they bend the rules because they contain enough of the correct rules to be able to work. Exactly. But let's take a look, guys, at some of these licks. So basically, the first two are taken from the tune Impressions, which was a big tune that Wes Montgomery used to play. Wes Montgomery has been a big influence on Pat Martino. If you know Wes Montgomery's playing and you hear Pat Martino, some of the influences are definitely evident. We haven't covered anything on octaves here, but Pat Martino does play octaves for, not so much in his soloing, I've noticed, but he definitely uses it to play melodies and things like that. So that's a big a big thing of his, and I believe, I'm not sure, but I believe the minorizing approach was also something that Wes Montgomery would use. So that influence has rubbed off a little on Pat Martino, but again, if you've looked at any of his kind of literature and his stuff, he's really devised his own kind of thinking and approach to a lot of this stuff, and he has some, you know, really quite wacky looking diagrams to explain the diminished and the augmented chords, and they're quite odd looking. They're like diamond things, and they make sense if you spend the time with them. When you first see them, you're a bit like, whoa, what's that? But so have a look at this first lick. This is just a static minor 7, right? Sorry. So basically, this is a very, this is taken directly from one of his recordings of Impressions. Almost contains the lick, that one. But so it's in terms of, just have a little look at that one quickly. What interval does it start on, guys, if we're on A minor 7?
Sure, it starts on the 9, yeah.
On the 9, great. So that 9, if you're looking to kind of recreate some of those Pat Martino kind of sounds, then the 9th or the 2nd is definitely going to be your friend. And what do you notice about how would we describe the movement in the line from the kind of the entry point to the downbeat of the bar that says A minor 7? Chromatic, exactly. So we've got some chromaticism there, haven't we? But you'll notice how that chromaticism is structured, and that's a really important point here. So the consonant notes fall on the beat, and the dissonant notes fall off the beat. So that's often a tool used to, that's why it kind of works if you did it the other way. So it still works. Kind of still works, but it doesn't sound as maybe in with the chords almost. But try both ways.
The chord tones are missing on the important parts of the beat.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of stresses almost. Yeah, exactly. So then we're going from we're going basically B, B flat, A flat or G sharp to a G, and then to an E. So then we've got like flat 7 and 5. Then we've got this this idea, which I know you will have discussed with Pete, this idea of like targeting or enclosure, where you're playing one side of the note you want to hit to the other side and then landing on the note. And there's various ways we can do that. You know, we can go a tone above, a semitone below, or semitone above, tone below. You can there are many ways you can approach it, or just semitone either side to then land on the note that you want. But something that he uses a lot is over a minor 7 chord. He's playing, he'll play an 11th or a 4th, then he'll go to the 2nd, and then he'll land on the minor 3rd. So that's what we're actually doing here. And the other thing to notice about his playing as well, just to mention that about his style, there's a very he's picking a lot of notes, so, and that's how you get that kind of thing. Pete and I were talking about it earlier. There's like a real drive to his playing, and that's partly through the picked notes. There are some legato notes, but
does that spring from anything like an influence for a note?
That's a good question. I don't know really. I don't know exactly. I mean, because it's his sound as well is very, again through in the process of kind of refamiliarizing myself with his stuff for preparing this, I saw an interview or a part of one of his videos where he talks about his sound, and he I think for a long time he was using kind of wooden picks, but on this video he's got one of these big kind of triangular Fender picks which is really thick, and he uses 16s, gauge, his top strings are 16, and he works back from there. So I think he ends up on like a 58 or something as his low E, which is pretty tough going when you consider how fast he plays as well. I mean, that's pretty insane. He's got to have some pretty strong hands going on there. I know I couldn't play 16s, that's for sure. But he said he picks really hard. And that's why he uses such thick strings, because otherwise I guess he's kind of bending things out of tune because he's picking so hard. But I don't know exactly where that influence comes from, because Wes Montgomery had a corn on his thumb. He had like an extra bit on his thumb, and that's, I think that helped him with his sound. But also what I've read is he kind of worked as like a labourer or something, and he would practice at night, and he would play with his thumb so as not to wake his wife. I read this story because it's softer than a pick, isn't it? You can kind of get a much more intimate, delicate kind of sound. So I think that was the reason for it. But yeah, I don't know exactly why he picks like that, but it's definitely a big part of his playing. Sorry. So basically, yeah, we've said we're going chromatically from 9 to flat 7, yeah? Then we're using this big device that he likes to use. A lot of players use this. Targeting, so going 4, 2 to flat 3. And then there's another little chromatic passage you can see from B. This is in kind of what's the second bar along on the page. We've got B, B flat, down to A. So we've... And there's a little, I'm playing that as a little slide. So then we've got this little arpeggio here. So again, this is a big thing that he favours for this kind of minor 7-chord sound, which is what is this? You tell me, what arpeggio is this? I'm playing A, F sharp,
D major.
D major, but we've got a B on the end.
Oh, sorry, B minus 7.
B minus 7, great. So that's like, that's the chord a tone above, isn't it? So even again, just as an aside, you can get so much good mileage out of just combining those two arpeggios, like using arpeggio pairings. So there's just noodling around with those ideas, you can get a lot of great language for that kind of minor sort of sound. But that's what he's using there, and then so he's basically playing a descending B minor 7 arpeggio here. And then what's this? Should be really obvious. C major 7, but over A minor 7. What intervals does that give us? So the C is.
So we got an A minor 9, yeah.
Exactly. We're implying A minor 9. Well done, Ali. Yeah. But what are the intervals specifically though? So we've got C is our minor third. What's E? 5. Minor 7. And then the 9. Great. So exactly.
That's basically extending C. That's extending the A minor 7, of course, but it's also falls into diatonic substitution as well.
Yeah, it is diatonic substitution, exactly. It's going a third above and playing the 7th chord,
Yes.
which always, if you're thinking diatonically, if you go a diatonic third above and you play the 7th chord from that degree, you get the 9th chord in relation to the original degree that you're playing off. So in other words, A minor 9, like you said. So that's a really, that's a really big device again that he would use. And then what have we got on the end? So again, this is a common bit of language. That's why that video, the lick, kind of exists. It is a very common piece of jazz language, and he likes to use that one. As many players do, and it's a good bit of language. Say again.
A natural natural minor scale.
Yeah, or just an A minor root to 4 really, because
Yeah, exactly.
we're not because we got no type of 6. We don't know if it's natural minor or
Yeah,
anything.
or
So
Dorian, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense.
exactly. So that's basically your whole lick.
Yeah, basically.
So if we don't worry if you can play along, do, but more just so we could hear it in context. Cool. Okay, so that gives us a context, and you can hear how those various ideas, it kind of weaves with the harmony a little bit, because you've got this nice weaving effect with those arpeggios. So that lick and the second lick are, to be fair, we probably don't have time to look at every single one of these licks, but that's obviously why you've got this to take away. But this second lick is based on sort of a similar idea, again like Dorian, but this time over the B flat minor 7. If you guys know Impressions, it's based on the same harmony as So What, Miles Davis. So it's basically a minor 7 chords vamp up a semitone and then back down again. That's essentially what happens, and it's 32 bars, so you get 8 bars. In this case, Impressions in I think Wes Montgomery used to play it in D minor. Here, Pat Martino's played it in A minor, so it's basically 8 bars of A minor 7, another 8 bars of A minor 7, 8 bars of B flat minor 7, 8 bars of A minor 7, and then that's the form, and it starts again. And it's a funny tune to play because it's very easy to get caught out on not having played enough of the A minor 7, because you get A minor 7 for 8, A minor 7 for 8, B minor 7 for 8, A minor 7 for 8, but sometimes your brain loses track of how many A minor 7s you've done before you need to change, and this is true even of as we said, So What is based on the same harmony. There's and that album's Kind of Blue, as I'm sure we're aware, and there's a book by a guy called Ashley Kahn called Kind of Blue, which documents the recording of that session. And the bassist Paul Chambers, who was playing with Miles Davis at that time, they had to keep redoing takes because he was having difficulty with the form. And that, in some ways, that can make you feel a little bit better because he's like one of the all-time kind of well-known great bass players, and he was having difficulty with the form, so it makes you feel a bit better about yourself on those dark days, But, so there is that one. I think maybe we should look at a couple of the ones that are based over chord changes, because that's when we start to see how the application of some of his ideas, relates to the actual chords we're playing. So what should we go with? You can see quite a few of these are 16th note lines. That's because he favours that kind of sound in his playing a lot. What was traditionally known as like doubling up, where you're playing, where you're doubling up on the 8th note essentially. So you've got 2 8th notes a beat, but here you're filling in those gaps, so you're playing twice as fast. So let's maybe trying to think of one of these which would be good to illustrate. Let's take that idea from How Insensitive. Yeah, this would be a good one. So the lick from How Insensitive, it's bar 18 on the sheet. So it's the second page. So if you flip that's it. If you flip that first page. So this one's kind of quite an interesting mix because it has some chromaticism as well. But this is partly based on that idea of using Dorian a flat 7 below. However, Dorian a tone below. So if we're on A7 or E minor 7, flat 5, we can go up to the minor third, which in this case is G, and play Dorian from that note. However, you'll notice there are some kind of different sounds going on there. So basically, that's it, that's what I wanted. So that first bar, essentially you're playing G, A, B flat, C, then C sharp, D sharp, which is quite interesting over an E minor 7 flat 5. Then you go E, F, G, A, which is all notes from G Dorian again. So, sorry, that's it, we want to do an F natural. Then what we do, so that's kind of our first bar, so it's like 1, 2, that's our first bar over that chord. So it's quite a weird sound over that chord, because and this illustrates, you know, we said about mixing approaches and how 2 and 5 can both be thought as 2, 5 can be thought as 5, and 2 can be thought as 5 as well. Here he's actually creating, you could say, like a hybrid scale which addresses some of chord 2 and some of chord 5. So the first 3 notes, these are very much E minor 7 flat 5. Not what that is, that's the racing theme, isn't it? But, flat 5 is there, we've got the B flat, exactly, and we've got flat 3, 11 or 4, flat 5 against the E, this is, and then flat 13 or flat 6, exactly. But so here we've got like major 6th or diminished 7 against the root, and then we've got major 7. So it's
G on there as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got a whole host of sounds, but this C sharp and the D sharp, you could argue they belong to the A7. They belong to like an A7 altered sound.
Yeah.
So
Would it be valid to say it's like almost half full?
it sort of is, isn't it? It almost is half whole, but
There's some chromaticism in there allowing that to happen almost.
yeah,
I don't know
but
if that's valid.
I think it. No. I think you're getting towards a good point there. It's also, I think it's you could almost say it's more like whole half, because with the exception of the F natural, you've got all the other intervals of whole half. So the F natural throws it out of kilter in that sense, but E. So if you've got, you know, it's almost like he's thinking of it as an E diminished. If you've got E diminished, you would play whole half on that. Sorry. So what we're playing is, actually we're not playing that at all, are we? So in actual fact we are playing E whole half, because we're not playing the F at all. Oh, actually we are, we get it at the top. Sorry to confuse matters, we are, because we've got it up at the top here. So we are doing that, but yeah, it's got that a diminished quality about it. But what happens when we get to that second bar is, again, he's kind of morphing different harmonies here. So we've got, so check it out, right? Look at that second bar of this lick. We start on a B flat, we got C and then a D flat, and then the C again. And check it out, we got a B natural. That's quite funky. So, and then we've got a G natural, and then we've got that B again. And then check out the last part of that lick. We've got B flat, G, D, B flat, G, D. What arpeggio is that? You can hear that. Anyway, can't we? G minor, isn't it? So we're back to that G minor sound, but that's over the A7. So we're kind of implying that idea we talked about of 7 flat 9 sus4, because we've got a flat 9, which is the B flat, we've got the flat 7 G, and we've got a D, which is our sus4 on an A chord, isn't it? So it's a really, particularly that B natural, this is chromaticism, right? He's using this as a chromatic passing note to get him into the B flat. Again, this is something he tends to do in his chromatic passages. He'll play chromatically on one note and then he'll go a major third below it and back to that note. So there's lots of examples of that on this sheet, but what this illustrates is the kind of hybrid nature of his lines. But we can still see the use of that kind of G Dorian kind of sound a little bit, and particularly that G minor arpeggio at the end. We need to hear that kind of in time, really, don't we?
Where's the major 6? In G.
What, you mean the E? Or
Yeah.
sorry, how do you mean? Are you?
I was just saying that the descending G minor arpeggio.
Yes.
Where's the 6, the major 6? If it's G Dorian.
I see. Well, in this case, yeah, we're not covering the 6th there particularly, but what we're doing is we're borrowing from G Dorian. We're borrowing that G minor arpeggio from Dorian essentially. We do have a 6 which comes prior to that, earlier on in the lick, but not complete with all the other notes. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, okay. So for all intents and purposes, descending there, it's just a G minor arpeggio. But if we were to put a 6 in there,
yeah. So that will work. I mean, if you wrong chord. I mean, that will work if you put that in.
It's the 5th. The A7.
So yeah, it kind of works. So
It's the 5th. The A7.
so I played the timing slightly wrong, but that's in context. That's how it sounds. Okay, 3, 4, 1, 2. So it sounds a little bit kind of out there, doesn't it? Because some of the tones are not quite connecting with the chord, but again, this is the idea, you know, just because it says A7, guys, that doesn't mean you have to, you know, play A7. You can play E flat 7. You can play kind of all sorts of altered things. On top of that, you could play that, you know, B flat melodic minor kind of sound. There's lots of stuff you can do. It's particularly in this context, in a jazz context, it kind of comes down to the accompaniment. And if you go with an idea, you know, the person who's comping will kind of back you up in the sense of what you're doing, or go against you to create an interesting sound. But so that's an idea on a minor 251. Maybe
It almost feels like it wants to resolve into G minor.
It sort of does, doesn't it?
So you were to play that instead of resolving back into
I think if you,
D minor.
the thing is, it's still, yeah, if you let that note run on. If we let that note run on, that's kind of the root note, isn't it? So I'm playing a 9 there, but I don't know, or maybe we result to the fifth or something. I don't know.
I just feel like maybe it's obviously subjective, but I feel like it wants to go. Like it wants
Right.
to go there. Which is
Right.
weird, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, yeah.
Entirely subjective. Carry on.
Yeah, no, that's cool. No, I mean, we'll explore that, I think, because it, you know, sometimes it does go, it could go there, couldn't it? That's like a delayed, you know, it's kind of delayed resolution thing, but, so, I think, basically, guys, there's a lot of licks here, as you can see. I've also stuck 2 more on the end, which are just others, so, with the exception of the last 2, all the others are Pat Martino licks that I've transcribed from a range of sources and recordings. Source, which makes you think of ketchup, but sources. But the last 2 are just a couple of extras that I've composed in the style of Pat Martino that, you know, seek to employ some of the ideas that are listed on the original sheet you've got. But I think it's probably worth just touching on quickly. Obviously, you've got those lines to take away. It's probably worth just touching on the. If you go back to like the information sheet that you had at the start with the text on it, it's probably worth just mentioning his approach to chords, really, because he's kind of got quite a specific system for deriving chords. And he describes them as parental forms. So, that side, yeah, that's it. So, and it's kind of the other ideas utilised by Pat Martino under that heading. So kind of halfway down. So yeah, he discusses parental forms in chords, and he cites diminished seventh chords and augmented triads as being kind of parental forms for chords that you can derive other chord forms from. Now, I think from the investigation I've done into this, the diminished seventh chords, in terms of the application of the theory on those, it seems to make a little more sense than the augmented chords. Except they do work to a degree, but it's worth exploring these. The best way to explore those chordal possibilities is kind of write out the notes in a diminished seventh chord and an augmented chord and see, you know, what other chords you can generate from changing one note in those chords, either move one note up a semitone or down a semitone. So just to read through what we've got here, it says, in terms of chords, Pat Martino uses a system based on diminished seventh and augmented chords to derive the different chord forms in the musical system. Diminished seventh chords are often used as substitutes for dominant chords. If you move the root of a diminished seventh chord down a semitone, you will find a dominant seventh chord. Taking this new note as the root and comparing to the other notes from the original diminished seventh chord. So basically, if you've got, say you've got what would be like F diminished here, if we take the bottom note of F diminished and move it down a semitone, we get an E7, right? Yeah. Now we know F diminished is actually the same as E7 flat and 9. It's got all the same notes. So what that tells us is F diminished is actually just E7, kind of in disguise. And what again, this is something he does on his, you know, in his kind of tuition videos. But he takes each of the notes in that diminished seventh chord and he moves it down a semitone. So if we take the B and we move that down a semitone, check it out, we get a B flat dominant 7. So if we take this,
F diminished.
Yeah, if we take F diminished down here, which is like a symmetrical chord form. So that's it, and that obviously moves in minor third. Sorry, one more. So if we move the F down a semitone, we get E7. If we bring the F back into play, we move the B flat down to. We move the B down to B flat, we get B flat 7. We go back to our original chord and we move the D down to D flat, we get D flat 7.
Okay.
And if we go back to the original chord, we take the A flat, we move that down to G, we get a G7. So that diminished seventh chord actually spells 4 different dominant chords. So F diminished 7 can be seen as F diminished 7, A flat diminished 7, B diminished D diminished 7, and the 4 dominant chords within that are E7, B flat 7, D flat 7, and then G7. So,
sorry, a bit of
no, that's fine.
a side point when you come to talking about. I'd always substituted sometimes for a dominant chord. So if I was at F, it would be. Oh yeah, D flat. Yeah, sorry, you're right. Sorry, that was what I was thinking about. But you already said it. So.
Okay, no, that's cool. No worries, no worries. No, that's all right. But and I guess to try and summarise that a little bit, what he then also does is he says, well, if you've got these type of chords, you can change one note in these chords to form your other chord types. So if you've got a dominant, you move the dominant 7 up to a major 7, or the flat 7 to a major 7, you get a major 7 chord. If you move the 3rd down, you get a minor 7. If you then move the 5th down, you get a minor 7, flat 5. And then if you
deducting semitones away from different chord types to monotons.
exactly. So
Can it go like indefinitely?
in what way do you mean?
So if you keep flattening everything down, so you start with a major 7 chord and you flatten the 7, you get a dominant chord, you flatten the flatten the 3rd, you get a minor 7 chord, flatten the 5th, you get a minor 7 flat 5 chord, and you flatten the root, you get a major 7 chord again, you do it again and again and again and
Yeah,
again.
basically you would end up with.
That sounds quite interesting.
So it would, yeah, you could kind of go on forever that. But just the other thing to mention briefly is the augmented triads thing. I would definitely suggest checking this out. But if you've got C augmented, for example, you can move any one of those notes up or down to create other chords. So if you take the G sharp stroke A flat and a C augmented, you move it up a semitone, you get an F minor. Also, if you have a C augmented and you move the E down to an E flat, you get F major. You get A flat major. And interestingly, F minor and A flat major are relative minor and major. So I think his system for chords kind of, the systems that Pat Martino utilises are really helpful for organising your fretboard and can really help with approaches to playing. So I think probably the best thing to say is obviously take this information. You've got the table with some of his commonly used ideas. The licks seek to illustrate that, so you can play through them. And I know I haven't labelled up the specific idea the lick is using, but I think that's probably quite a good thing because it engages you in terms of trying to analyse those and develop those for yourself rather than me just kind of telling you what they are. It's good for you to kind of really get in there and rip them apart a bit. And I know that's how I learned to do stuff, was by really transcribing a lick and then saying, okay, what's happening here? What notes is he using in relation to the underlying chord? So you've got that, and the main idea to take away from him, I think, or at least one of his main ideas, is this idea of minorization, where you're kind of converting everything to minor in order to give you lots of your sort of ideas that you can play over each chord, rather than having to think of every chord as being different. You can kind of group them together more closely. And yeah, you've got plenty of these lines. I would encourage you to check out the tunes that are listed as where the licks have been taken from, because there'll undoubtedly be a lot of other great licks to be had. And then there's a few additional ideas here that you can check out as well, and yeah, just a bit of information to read through as well. I've mentioned his book Linear Expressions, the Creative Force video, and kind of 3 albums to check out. El Hombre, which was his debut album in I think it was '67. We didn't mention this about him, but you may or may not know, but in 1980, I think it was, he actually had a brain aneurysm and he forgot everything. He had to relearn the guitar. So he's been a master guitarist twice in his life, because
But it says, I remember, I think it was when I was having a lesson with Mike Goodman, he mentioned,
Yeah.
he mentioned he sounded different when he relearned the guitar.
Right.
He didn't sound like the same player anymore.
Right.
Is what I've heard.
Right. I mean, there's elements that are the same, I think, but yeah, I think there's elements the same, but I think it would have been very difficult for him to sound exactly the same.
Yeah.
Just because it's going to be really hard to do that.
All the muscle memory would still be there.
Yeah.
It's just how to use it.
I mean, I would encourage you to
to get it
make a
right hand
comparison. No, to make a comparison
All right.
between the two. But I hope that's been useful, guys. And
Yeah,
thanks so much. Cool.
Okay, great.
Good stuff.
Amazing Nat Martin. Thank you so much. I think I deserve a round of applause.
Hey.
Thanks.